Hello everyone and welcome to Mrs. Maypole's Costuming. My name is Christina. Now today we're going to be working on an 1830s work dress. Now the pattern I'm using is the Past Patterns one from a long time ago, but it's really nice because it's based off of a mill worker's original extant garment. And so it's amazing to be then seeing how someone who would be working a hard factory job still has these elements in this dress. So there's rather the giant sleeves, like a mutton sleeves, gigot sleeves, as well as there's a slight variant where the sleeves are then tucked down. I'm doing the one where it's tucked down. My thought process for my character, so to speak, is that this dress is almost secondhand. And so it was made in the earlier part of the 1830s, and when myself with my character has it, it is now a little bit later on. So I've done the additions and done the add-ons to get it ready and make it more fashionable for the later 1830s. So you'll see as I go about making the dress, I keep that in mind as I'm building it. And I'm very excited to get to it. So let's get going onto an 1830s working dress.
So here you see the front of the bodice. I've already made the darts. Now these darts have been done with a special hemming stitch that was recommended, and so as you can see it ends up creating little dashes on one side and diagonals on the back stitches. So once you have prepped your bodice on both the front and back, what you're going to be doing is folding over. Here I'm just doing a gentle finger press to get it all set and ready to go, and then ironing it. You end up folding and sewing the pieces with this fold on top, and it adds a bit of extra security when you are sewing the pieces together, as you have then fabric to help with the interlocking process, not just the seam to be pulled and torn at. Then you do the same thing with the shoulder pieces. So you fold them over and give them a bit of a press on both sides, and then you're going to just put this tab and sew it onto the main bodice.
Hello everyone. So this is what the bodice lining now currently looks like. So remember that this is going to be effectively the part that's closest to my skin, and then this is the part that connects to the outside. Now I have done some alterations to it. First things first, the whole front was just too broad for me, so I did make a seam straight down the middle. It's 3/8 down below, so 6/8 cut out of the front for the entire area. It was gaping so much at the neckline that this whole thing really could just be shrinked in a little. By doing that though, I did need to add in a little bit of extra bust space, as these seams on the edges started making little S's where it was big enough, it was too tight on the bust, but then in the waist it started going down like this, which indicates that the waist is too big, the bust is too small. So I let this dart out and I added a bit to it on both sides, and then I just shrank down this dart about an inch, which gives me maybe a 1/4 inch or so, maybe a 1/4 inch to a centimeter, so half an inch of extra space in the chest on both sides. So that's close to an inch once you put them both together. So once that was done, these seams on both sides were fitting much better, which I really loved. The other thing I want to point out is that I did need to substantially lengthen the shoulder seam. I do have fairly strong arms, so this definitely needed a bit more space. I could barely get my arm into it, even considering the fact that this will get pulled back. So the thing that's interesting with this is that you have your full selvage, pin it on, fold it down, and then you tack it. So you can see I've just done a running stitch with every so often there's a back stitch just to give it a little extra strength. So then you can also see with this smaller waist but larger back space up top. Yes, I'm really liking how it is fitting. Another thing that this requires is a little gap here. This will be for attaching when you do the waistband and whatnot, so it fits on. But otherwise, I think this is looking rather lovely. Very excited for it. Now moving on, I am going to be working on the true bodice, the outside exterior material, that'll again be kind of oddly just kind of sewn on top of this, kind of like gluing it together. So with that, here is the front.
For the darts on the bodice, you end up doing a half back stitch as this part will be more viewable, and so right here I am just prepping that front bodice piece as well as the back, getting those darts set in so that they look nice and sharp for viewing. You'll also see that the next step in prepping these pieces is to create gathers, so I'm just making a running stitch along the bottom, which will then get pulled out to the appropriate size a little bit later. The back piece is made up of two pieces, so you can see the seam that I also have back stitched in there. Quite proud of the piecing in this part. And for these, you end up doing a very tiny, slightly folded edge along the back center seam.
From this point, you have seen the making of the bodice lining, as well as preparing the individual pieces of the outer fashion layer of this garment. So now it's the efforts of putting it together. I will be doing a bit of cheats, especially on areas where you're not going to be seeing it. I will be using my machine. Just speed things up just a wee bit, but I am happily surprised at how much of this pattern really does need hand sewing for it to look really nice. So,
as you can see, this is the back that's now been sewn on to my lining. So you can see where the gathers have been, as well as how it's just been sewn along the edges. You can really see it on the back here with the brown thread I used for this. This part was done by machine to get it there. And now to do the same thing with the front here, it is pinned down, and I'm going to be sewing this on top. Now parts of this will be done by hand, such as this seam as it will be shown. So this is done the same way with the folded down one side, and then you kind of tack it on and through.
now from this point, you really haven't seen any of this actually on me, so I thought I would give a little bit of a sneak peek of how it's going. Now, as you can clearly see, I'm just wearing my regular street clothes underneath right now. So the bust is completely in the wrong spot. We're taking that aside, just seeing how these pieces are now fitting together on the human form. So as you can see, I have now finished piecing the exterior layer of the fashion fabric on, there's a little sample seam. You can also see when I have this on my street clothes underneath how wide the shoulders are. So the 1830s is all about a good droopy shoulder with big I didn't think of it biceps or like those like little floaty devices many times children have before they can swim, like on their arms. So you can see it's nice and low on me, and just me even holding it down here at the waist it is still nicely staying up. It's not trying to fall down. So that's good. So you might be curious why the lining is a different size than the exterior. It's supposed to be like that. I put my waistband here and it kind of loops around, and this adds a bit of extra security between all the layers when you also have a skirt on and whatnot attached to this. So with that in mind, let's get working on our waistband.
For the waistband, I am folding it over approximately half an inch, but my main focus is making sure they're on the main stripe lines, as well as doing that on one part of one side of the lining, and then pinning these both in place and then sewing them to the bodice. So the waistband front was done as a running back stitch, so you can see some of those stitch lines there. And to make sure that the waistband on the inside isn't viewable, it does go over that little flap there, but then this will be done by the hemming stitches that were done for the initial lining darts. So that goes all along here, making sure not to have it go through to the front, and this will then hold it secure.
Alright, this is what it looks like on. I am really pleased with the results so far. So waistline is nice and even all throughout. It's also a little higher. This is important because that's what keeps it fairly flat against my back. Now it does have a bit of ruching here, so it's pop out just a tiny bit, but it's still lying nice and flat there. I had a bit of a small problem where when I was trying to pin it back at the neck, I overlapped them too much, which made it so the way the sleeves were coming up and I had all this puckering, and I was like, what happened? How did I get all this puckering? But just, I had accidentally made the back smaller than it was supposed to be. Once I readjusted that, everything lined up well here. I do have a little bit of excess fashion of the top layer fabric here, but that's just a problem with the basting stitch line here. So I'm just going to take that out and re-fold it on while I'm wearing it to make sure they're nicely in the right spots, as I am into the next step, which is putting piping on. So that's really important to make sure this is nice and smooth. Alright, so we'll do a little turn so you can see how it's looking like at the back. Quite pleased with the way the back fits. And we are on our way. So I thought I'd give you a quick update on what's been happening. Here is the piping. I've done a half back stitch on that to secure it down. And now I am putting my bias tape, which you may recognize as some leftovers from my stays. I figured the frugality of it was more than era appropriate, even if it doesn't match either of these two fabrics. This is on the inside though, nobody can see it. And so what I'm currently up to is nearly done, but I'm doing back stitching right along effectively the same line right here. And so this is what it'll look like once it's folded over. And I'm going to be getting ready. Next step would be then to fold this all down and sew it across, as well as trimming all this excess. You can really see it right here where this seam is. There is an impressive amount of bulk. So by trimming it down, that gets rid of the bulk, because nobody needs extra bulk around their neckline. You want it to be as smooth as possible. So I'm just going to finish this off and then work on trimming and hemming this down.
This is what that neckline looks like all finished. You can see a little bit of the sleeve right there. Now on to sleeves with just a little bit of help this time. To make the sleeves, I am first initially marking around where the pleats are going to get put in, and then I just used my ruler to put in the approximate length. I just found this a little bit easier. After that, I am just pinching them in and pinning them both on the far end where it finishes as well as at the very top to hold them in place, and I just keep going round and round until all the pins are in place.
This is how the sleeve is looking so far. Now I've basted it into the bodice so I could get the proper measurements and the width for my own arm. You really want this portion to be really tight on you, and that's what gives this the support to push up. So I really want this tight to get this nice and big. But it's looking really good. I like the length of it. I've got long arms naturally. Most of the time in patterns I'm always extending the width of the sleeve, the length of the sleeve, not shortening it. So I'm good with where it is sitting here. I just have to take off what feels like 1 to 2 inches along the whole bottom and then even it out here. And the way I do that is I have to take it, unfortunately, and take it out of my sleeve, fix it all up, and then put it right back in. So you're going to be seeing me doing that next. All right. A little close up so you can see it's happy. I only have it pinned right now at the waist, so it's a little bulgy. Ignore that. But yes, I am quite pleased. All right, see you soon.
Got to trim that sleeve so you can see how much had to get removed. And here I am just adding a chain stitch onto the pleats to hold them in place.
And with that, the bodice is now complete. So what I did with the sleeves was I put the sleeves on by back pinning them in place and then just back stitching them really tinily to make sure they fit properly. There was a lot of fabric that was between both the sleeve and the bodice, and sewing that in. So doing it by hand makes it a little bit easier. It certainly takes a while, but then you're really precise about where it's going. It gives you less room for error. Protect my seams, I just whip stitch them all the way around. I cut them down to a 1/4 seam allowance and then just whip stitched it. And that'll hold them in place. So that way it doesn't keep fraying, get all knotted and messy under my underarms. I have good chunk of mobility, especially with all this fabric, even though it's pinned down here. Still looking really good. And what keeps my poofs a little puffy is the fact that it's tight around my arm here. So, thought I'd show you that. Now the bodice is done, it is time to get working on the skirts. And so one thing I'm going to make a comment about is I'm deviating from the original pattern. Original pattern has you cut your fabric into panels appropriate to the width of fabric at the time. To save on my fabric, I'm just going 2 full panels with 2 side seams here. Saves me a bit of fabric, so my spirit is in the right space for a working woman. But as well, it means that I'm going to have a bit of an easier time if I decide to put pockets into the skirt. A little undecided about that part yet. So, with that in mind, let's get working on my skirt.
My initial panels had a bit of a rip kind of throughout the side seam, so I just snipped those right off. I sewed these together with about a 1/2 inch seam allowance with a gap in it to put a pocket space. And to make sure those seams didn't unravel, I am folding them in half, then we'll be folding them again and then sewing those down. Also added in the back flap while I was piecing everything together. This gave me a little bit of challenge, but it looks good right now. And now to use my template to put the panels and pleat those down.
At this point in time now, I have the bodice and dress all constructed. So the bodice is now attached to the dress. Very good. So on the exterior, so remember there's two waistbands, the exterior fashion fabric and then the one that's the linen. The exterior one is half back stitched on, and I tried to put those as stitches along a brown a brown stripe in the plaid, so it's almost impossible to see them. I think I accidentally went over places like maybe 2 times because I couldn't see that I'd already made my stitch there. Not an issue, I guess it just means it's extra secure there. And it looks really amazing. And then on the inside, so once you've done that, you do the inside, you fold the lining waistband up against them, and then I just did those hemming stitches that I did for those darts and all throughout this dress really to secure the waistband to the skirt on the back side. So that's been done. I also did during the sewing, there's a bit of the weird flaps that are on the back panels. Those have now been placed on top of the waistband and then hem stitched in. So those are looking really great. Happy about that, as well as the edges of the waistband have now been sewn in. So the only things that are left to do are the pinning the hooks and eyes onto the garment, as well as hemming it. Now, especially seeing the dress on as it's full size, the fabric it's very drapey and soft, which I expected. So I did buy some twill just as an add-on, and that's going to be used to help add a stiffening layer to my hem, so it helps kind of push it out a little bit so it won't be quite as straight down. So we'll be getting into that in just a moment. Here we go.
For this, I cut out 2 4-inch panels of my twill, and then I sewed them on to the hem of my skirt. So I added about 1 inch or so. I just tried to follow the stripes in the plaid. Sewed that on both right where at that hemline as well as at the top, so stop it from wrinkling up within the hem itself. So this part is sewing then that top band to keep it nice and flat, and then all this got folded together and up and then hemmed at the very top of that band. This keeps it nice and secure and strong, and you really honestly can't see any of this machine sewing because I did put it all on stripes within the fabric, so it's hidden away. And last thing was to put the hooks and eyes on.
And with that, the dress is complete. Now, something I love about this is I always love looking at the insides of dresses. I find sometimes the inner work is much more satisfying than the outer work, and that's very much the case with this. I love seeing the inside and seeing the kind of messiness of all the hand stitching and all that's been done, and how I've really like how the arm is put in. You just like cut it and do whip stitching, and the fact that none of that is really properly hidden, and you have all these seams that you can kind of see And I really like seeing that, or all the stitch layers. I think that sort of thing is really interesting, both on when we make garments nowadays, but also historic garments. It really helps add to understanding the layers and processes of how these things are built. So it's fun when you get to do that yourself. And now let's get on to the big reveal. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Take care. If you did like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Bye.